Welcome, everybody. I'm Alan Levine. I'm the director of the Political Theory Institute. And on behalf of my colleague, Tom Merrill, and President Alger Civic Life Initiative, welcome to tonight's event on the future of progressivism. Please note our companion event on the future of conservatism on February 24th, featuring Washington Post columnist Megan McArdle and Georgetown professor Joshua Mitchell. Same time, same room on the 24th. Later in the semester, we had Ian Shapiro from Yale talking about why we're so angry, Roosevelt Montas from Columbia on rescuing Socrates, how the great folks changed my life and why they matter for a new generation, and Nathan Tarkov of the University of Chicago, who was a professor of both Congressman Khanna and myself. He will be here speaking on Machiavelli, poet and lover. But tonight's event is on the future of progressivism. The progressive left has had but limited success in American elections. Despite the splashes of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Biden won the presidency because he was regarded as centrist, and Sanders and Kamala Harris lost in part because they were not. Trump won running on an explicitly anti-woke platform. Is there a future for progressivism in the United States? Today we have two most eminently qualified people to speak on this. Ruy Teixeira, lifelong Democrat strategist and one of the nation's most influential political demographers, famously argued that demography is destiny and that the major demographic trends favor Democrats. But he's also argued that the Democratic Party has bungled its opportunity due to the extremism of the progressive left. For him, lifelong Democrat, the progressive wing of the party is the problem. We'll be in conversation with Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents Silicon Valley, and who many deem, as himself, the very best hope for the progressive left's future in the United States, and a likely presidential candidate, perhaps as soon as 2028. I'm not asking. I'm not asking. Each speaker is going to talk for 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions from the audience. I think we should begin with Ruy Teixeira laying out his analysis of where we are. And Congressman Khanna just today has published an op-ed in the New York Times, of which there are copies floating around or in the back. I'm not sure, but they are around. If this op-ed launches your campaign, I'm going to take credit for having focused your attention with this event. So with that, Ruy Teixeira, please.
Okay. Well, thanks, Alan. Nice to be here at AU, a place I'm very familiar with since I was born and raised in this area. I've spent many happy hours, at least in the vicinity of AU. It's good to be here.
You talking like?
Oh, use the mic?
Okay, yeah. Stand up there.
No, that's okay. I'll just be here. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, the future of progressivism is the ostensible topic of our discussion today. And I might put it a little better, a little bit differently. Does progressivism have a future? And let me explain this. I mean, think about it this way. And Alan was sort of alluding to this a little bit. As Democrats have become more progressive over the course of the 21st century, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, Democrats have done less and less well in some important respects, particularly among the working class, and of course, famously lost to Donald Trump twice. So let me give you some stats from the 2024 election. Okay, working class voters writ large, mine here is non-colored voters. The Democratic margin or deficit basically tripled in this election from 4 points as a deficit to 12 points of a deficit, right? And you can go back to the Obama election of 2012. Those were the days. That was when the Democrats actually still carried the working class. I mean, famously, a lot of this has been done the white working class, moving away from the Democrats. In the last election, probably the deficit was around 30 points to Trump. But, and this is not nearly as widely understood as it should be, what's really, sort of making it almost impossible for Democrats to keep their head above water among working class voters is they're losing ground very rapidly among non-white working class.
It's so hard to hear without the mic.
Hold it really
On and
close
off.
to your mouth.
Oh, really? Okay. Hello? Hello?
That's better.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
close, yeah.
All right. Well, so as I was saying, they're losing ground very rapidly among non-white working class voters. That's key. That's a big development in the last period of time. If you compare 2012 to 2024, the Democratic margin among non-white working class voters has basically been cut in half, for about 65 to 32 points. There's a lot of reasons for that and a lot of sort of moving parts of that, but one of the key moving parts is what's happening with Hispanic voters. The Democrats' margin among Hispanic voters basically has declined by 2/3 since 2012, and that's primarily among working class voters, and Hispanics overwhelmingly a working class constituency. So we see the Democrats, as they're getting ever more progressive, doing ever more poorly among working class voters, ever more poorly among non-white working class voters, and ever more poorly among the segment of non-white voters who in theory should be most open to them and to whom they're trying to render assistance, right? I mean, that's what progressive is supposed to be about. We're going to help the downtrodden, the oppressed, the people who are disadvantaged. The disadvantaged don't seem to appreciate it very much anymore. Famously in this election, if you look at voters by income, Trump carried voters between 0 and 50K in family income, 50 and 100K in family income. What's the income group Democrats did the best among and carried? Voters with over 100K in family income. So that's kind of interesting, right? I mean, this is not what the Democratic Party is supposed to be about, particularly a progressive Democratic Party. You can also see similar tendencies and who represents the most represents the richest, most educated congressional districts. They've completely flipped from being Republican to being Democratic. So that's important. Here's another interesting fact from the 2024 election, which I think really shocked a lot of people, even though you could kind of see it coming in the polls, which is what happened with young voters. I mean, young voters were supposed to be the voters who were least likely to go for Donald Trump because, Jesus, this crazy old guy, I'm not going to vote for him. But they did, at least in, bigger margins than they did before. Famously, young men really swung toward Trump. They went from about plus 15 Democratic in 2020 to about plus 15 Republican in 2024. So a swing of 30 points. That's big. And then if you look at young women, this was a real shocker because famously young women under 30 are supposed to be, and indeed are, unusually ideologically liberal, at least according to most data that I've seen. But oddly, they did not, swing toward Kamala Harris. In fact, they swung away from her. She probably did about 15 points worse in terms of margin among these voters than Joe Biden. Joe Biden did in 2020, and they could vote for a young, dynamic, relatively young, dynamic black woman at the top of the ticket. They didn't want to do it. So something's going on here, and it's not good for the Democrats. It's not good for their image and reality of them being a working class party. Now, what's the exception to this? The exception to this overall sort of series of trends in terms of how the Democrats have been doing is white college graduates. You look across all the key demographics you might care to name, think about, worry about, what is the great shining light for the Democrats as they become more progressive? Not non-whites, not working class voters, white college graduate voters. This is where Democrats have turned a chronic deficit going back to the late part of the 20th century, early part of the 21st century, into a pretty solid advantage among these voters. I mean, it was probably about 7 points nationwide as opposed to a 7-point deficit under Obama in 2012. And it's much bigger than that in a lot of blue or purple leaning states. So Democrats, love their white college graduates. Kind of like Donald Trump famously said at one point, I love the poorly educated. The Democrats might say, I love the highly educated, because that's who's voting for them. So overall, obviously there were a lot of disquieting trends from the 2024 election. Famously, Trump carried every swing state. Um, and this is something that I think still hasn't sunk in with a lot of people. Republicans for the last 3 years have an advantage on party identification. That hasn't happened in pretty much forever. Um, something's going on with voter registration, something's going on with party identification that is leading more and more voters to not have their default option be the Democrats in partisan terms, but rather their default option be Republicans. That's a big sea change, and it's very important. And then, not to belabor the fact, but the Senate is a big problem, right? The Democrats are now so uncompetitive in so many states that are not highly urban, highly educated, that their ability to actually take back the Senate at this point is highly compromised, right? Um, you know, all those states, they may not be full of that many people. They may be more rural than you used to, but they all get 2 senators. And the Democrats are definitely disadvantaged by that at this point. So, well, why would this be? I mean, how did this come to pass? How did a party that has increasingly embraced progressivism wind up being out of touch with the working class? Well, I think that has a lot to do with the morphing of progressivism over time. If you look back at the left in the 20th century, that sort of disparate constellation of socialists and social democrats and radicals, people who were positioned themselves on the left of the center-left parties, they were the shock troops for getting unions, for economic programs that benefit the working class and the middle class. They were the ones who were out there fighting against discrimination, for equal rights for everybody, for, and to protect the environment at some point, starting in the 60s. So there was a whole constellation of issues and reformist kind of projects that they were associated with. They were actually quite successful. But the way progressivism morphed in the 21st century has made it something quite different, where it's committed to a whole series of positions that have increasingly come to define what it means to be on the left, what it means to be aggressive, that in fact are quite different than what the 20th century left stood for. And I'll just read you a sort of summary of this that I wrote in one of my pieces. As I point out, as the teens drew to a close, COVID, George Floyd summer, the left was larger than it had been in a long time. I mean, for a long time, people didn't want to hear from the left in the very late 20th century, early 21st century. And it was very different from its earlier iterations. This was a left that believed America was a white supremacist society, fully bought into climate catastrophism, prized equity, quote unquote, over social order, good governance, and equal opportunity, and had convinced itself that no human being is illegal was a sound approach to immigration policy. And they are perfectly willing to shout down you if you didn't believe all this stuff, or even if you didn't use the right language when referring to these issues. And as I note, no coincidence, this was a left that also had almost no connection anymore to the working class. So that's a lot what happened, that litany, that ideology, that way of looking at the world occupied increasing brain space, mind space, policy space, cultural space in the Democratic Party. And it really made the influence on the left on the Democratic Party, I would say, not entirely benign in many ways, and is sort of responsible for a lot of the problems that they currently have. Well, here are some specific examples, right? I mean, let's take the issue of immigration. I mean, Democrats in the late part of the 20th century would have been shocked by the position of the left in the 21st century developed. Back then, nobody had any problems talking about border security. People thought that, in fact, while we didn't want to be cruel to immigrants, we do have to have some limits for the amount of immigration we have. Immigrants compete, low-skill immigrants compete with workers for jobs. They lower wages. You have to be careful about what you do, and people shouldn't be able to employ illegal immigrants. I mean, Barbara Jordan said we should have an e-verify system so we could prevent employers from employing illegal immigrants at lower wages. And this was not controversial, right? They thought that this was the right way to approach it. They weren't opposed to a legal immigration system, but they did think illegal immigration, because of its low-skill nature, was fundamentally problematic, would undercut the working class, would undercut unions, and so on. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we get to the mid-teens, and we go into eventually get the Biden administration. You shift from the Trump position on immigration, which was trying to crack down on it. And we could argue that, famously, there's some aspects of this that were not very salubrious. But what Biden did basically was he caved in to the immigration advocates in and around the party. That, again, there's sort of the shadow party that isn't the Democratic Party quite, but it has huge influence on them. The nonprofits, the advocacy groups, the foundations, so on and so forth. The pundits who hold forth in your favorite legacy media outlet, they all thought, well, this is like, it's for the birds, basically not being open to immigration. If people want to come here, they kind of should have the right to do it. Anybody should be able to claim asylum, even on the flimsiest of pretexts. If it results in a surge of immigration, illegal immigration, so be it. And in fact, it did. The immigration surge under Biden, the Biden administration, was the biggest immigration surge we've had since the late 1900s and early 20th century. It was massive, and it was fundamentally driven by illegal immigration. And the Democrats suffered terribly because they were incredibly unpopular, right? By the time you get to the end of the Biden administration, people are saying, including Hispanic voters, therefore basically deporting everybody in the country. No, that's not going to happen, but it just shows the extent of the blowback against the Democratic immigration policy. Yes, let's use troops. Yes, let's send people back to, let's do this, let's do that. Anything to stop the tide. There's too much. You went from right at the beginning of the Biden administration, coming after Trump, people saying, well, an unusual amount of people saying maybe we should have more immigration, to a record number of people saying we should have less immigration. So the Democrats really managed to turn that on a dime in terms of the immigration issue. And it was really primarily, I think, driven by the progressives in and around the Democratic Party, who thought that it was really no big deal if people come here illegally, that fundamentally, we are kind, open, and, they're oppressed people all over the world, and of course they want to come to America. We should welcome them. Remember, no human being is illegal, right? I mean, I see a lot of these signs in my neighborhood. What the hell does that mean? If an immigrant comes here illegally, they are, in a sense, illegal. I mean, you can't even say illegal anymore. Remember when Biden got in trouble because he referred to the killer of Laken Riley as an illegal immigrant in his State of the Union address? 2 days later, he had to walk it back and say, oh, I meant undocumented. Why? Because you're not allowed to refer to illegal immigrants as illegal. This is just an example of how out of touch the Democratic Party has become on a key issue. And again, I think largely attributable to the priorities of the progressive left. Take the issue of lax law enforcement, public disorder, of being tolerance for sort of low levels of law breaking, not wanting to put people in jail. I mean, this has been a terrible idea. The Democrats became associated with a lax approach to crime and public order, and voters absolutely hated it. To this day, the Democrats' image on crime is dreadful, and Republicans have big advantages on it. Why? Because a lot of Democratic governance has become associated with tolerance toward crime, tolerance toward public disorder, and people just hate it. They hate it. They don't want to worry about, the public safety. And, it's famously one progressive guy I read, he ruefully admitted, well, when this was first kicking off, criminal justice reform, people talking about maybe we should defund the police and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, I don't know, but maybe. Well, now I realize that, in fact, you do need police for public safety. I guess I was kind of, what do you mean you do? Why does it take all this happening to realize you need police for public safety? Police are good. Police is what keeps public order, and public order is good. These are public goods the government must provide, and Democrats becoming dissociated from these fundamental values about public safety, about stopping crime, has been an incredibly large liability for them. And again, I would put this at the door of the progressive left. Another thing that's been a problem is seeing everything through the prism of identity politics. You've sort of got this constellation of intersectional web of hierarchies of race, gender, ability and disability, of sexuality, of whatever. And that's really the proper way to look at people. And we always have to be aware of all these intersecting levels of oppression and the microaggressions that might be attendant upon you if you don't understand these things. We must change the language people use to discuss them. We must always be striving for equity, where we basically try to equalize not just opportunity, but outcomes. And if we're not doing that, it just shows there is racism, or there is sexism, or there's whatever. This has been a complete disaster, in my opinion. most Americans to this day believe with Martin Luther King Jr. that, you know, people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That is baseline what people believe in this country. They do not believe there should be any racial preferences. They do not believe that there should be lower standards for any particular group in the country. They don't believe in any of this stuff. But this became fairly much a gospel assumption within huge sectors of the Democratic Party, and it's had a big effect on how the Democratic Party is perceived. What people really believe in is equal opportunity. I mean, Trump says he's gonna, you know, he's gonna move us toward a colorblind, merit-based society. I mean, Democrats need to understand this is what people believe in. You may not think, you know, Trump is going to do a particularly good job doing this, and maybe he won't, but that is what people want. And the extent Democrats resist this, because famously for a long time, and I think it's still true in sectors of the Democratic Party, if you talk about, you know, colorblind America, that's what we need. I mean, that's just racism, you know, because we understand there's the disparities and structural racism and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the fact you would even talk about a colorblind America means you just don't get it. So I think all that stuff has to go. And I would lay a lot of that at the door of the progressive left. Another example, fossil fuels, energy, climate change. I mean, it's hard to believe now, but if you look back, it wasn't so long ago during the Obama administration when people weren't so crazy about this issue. When Obama, you know, talked about all of the above energy policy, and he said this, you know, he treated climate change as an issue we needed to care about, and we should try to do something about, but not an overarching, all-deciding existential crisis to which all other policies must be submitted. The fact of the matter is that Democrats got themselves into a space where they're telling everybody fossil fuels are evil, you know, and you shouldn't use them, or you should use as little of them as possible, and we should rapidly move away from this and make our society completely undependent on fossil fuels. Now, if you look at the data on what people think about this issue, they're completely unconvinced. I mean, climate change is an issue most people recognize, but it's a tertiary issue, particularly among working class voters who believe there is a climate change problem, but you know, it's like number 17 in their list of things the United States should try to do. But it may be number 17 for those normie working class voters, but for a lot of the elites who dominate the Democratic Party, particularly the educated liberal part, it's not a number 17 issue. It's like number 1 or 2. So that really creates a disjuncture, a contradiction between what Democrats, especially activist Democrats, care about and what a lot of their politicians who represent them care about, and what normal working class people really care about, which is they want cheap, reliable, abundant energy. And they realize quite sensibly it's going to take a long time to transition away from fossil fuels. If you ask people, do you want an economy that's run, you know, basically off of renewables, wind or solar, or do you want an economy that's run off of, you know, renewables plus nuclear power plus fossil fuels and so on? They say, of course, we want all of the above, you know, like it's 3 to 1. If you ask people, do you think we should have, you know, generate more natural gas, produce more fossil fuels in this country? People say yes, like you know, 20 or 30 points. So people just are not in the space that your typical Democrat is in terms of thinking fossil fuels are evil. They must be gotten rid of as fast. And it's this existential crisis to which everything else must be subsumed. Frank, you know, famously, Biden at one point said, you know, gosh, climate change, if we, you know, get this net zero thing under control in the next 10 or 15 years, I mean, that'd be really bad. I mean, you think nuclear war is bad. This would be really bad, right? But what is he talking about? The idea that we're in any danger at this point of having a climate-based cataclysm that's remotely similar to nuclear war is just silly. And I think people hear this stuff and they think that's just bonkers, you know? You know, I think, yeah, this is a problem. I get why people are concerned, but, you know, I got my life to live. You know, it's not like nuclear war, and it's not like a cataclysm that's going to carry me away tomorrow. And I think the Democrats should get a grip, for Christ's sake. So these are hills, unfortunately, I think the progressive left is willing to die on. And this is a problem, right? I mean, it's not that, you know, they got the right to advocate for what they want. You know, it's America. But they don't have the right to insist the Democratic Party has to embrace all these positions, even when they're both unpopular and unworkable. And I think that's another the problem. I think a lot of people in the progressive left, perhaps the majority, are not willing to let go of these unpopular and unworkable positions and move the Democratic Party to the center in a way that will make it, back to my original point about statistics, credible to working class voters. this is non-trivial. Democrats are the party of the working class in this country, at least historically have been. And they should be like not sleeping at night because they're no longer the party of the working class. The Republicans are the party of the working class in any kind of nose counting sense. So you may think, oh, yeah, but they're not in the interest of the working class. That never works. It never works to tell people, well, see, your real interests lie with our party, and you're just voting for that party because you don't understand what your real interests are. People are basically extremely hostile to that kind of condescending approach. So, I mean, progressives, they may die on these hills. That may happen. They may not be capable of reform, of sort of promulgating a new kind of progressivism that would get back to the best of the 20th century left, to a sensible social democratic approach to economics, to being foursquare for environmental protection and anti-discrimination and so on. And they'd be willing to die on these hills that are unpopular and, as I say, I think basically workable as policy. But that's what I think. At least that's possible, and they may reform themselves. And maybe it's Congressman Khanna who has a solution. So I'll turn it over to him.
Well, thank you, Alan, for inviting me and to American University. I appreciate that my former professor Nathan Tarkoff is coming here later. Probably far more insightful than anything I will say in this talk. My only recollection of classics of social thought is that his view that Machiavelli and the liberal theorists had too procedural a view of justice and too narrow a view of justice. And of course, the ancients had a thicker conception of the common good. And that's actually a challenge for Democrats today in terms of what beyond the Constitution and Declaration of Independence is American identity, and actually a question for the country. Ruy, you're always so thoughtful, and I appreciate your commentary. Agree with some of it, disagree with other parts, but it is your writing has really helped inform the thinking for many, and I read you very regularly, and I encourage others to read Ruy. And Bill Galston, thank you for all your insights. Bill's a wonderful thinker and has helped not my mistakes, but my better parts has helped give good insights. So I appreciate you being here. Let me start with a simple premise. I believe America started in 1776. I think this is an exceptional nation. And it's a nation where a son of Indian immigrants, whose grandfather spent 4 years in jail alongside Gandhi, could grow up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in the 1970s and 1980s, in a 99% white county at the time. And I had teachers who believed in me. I had Little League coaches who believed in me, even though I couldn't hit. I watched the bunt. And I had neighbors who believed in me. I grew up on a street which it wasn't hard up. My father was an engineer, was middle class, but on our street, you had a senior executive at a corporation. That house had the pool. All of us went to that house for the pool, and then you had nurses and HVAC technicians and folks who were electricians, all in the same street. We all played Little League together. I was reminded of it because the Eagles won the Super Bowl. We were all, huge Philadelphia sports fans. And when I think about politics, actually, the core of my politics comes from my thinking of how would folks in Amsterdam Avenue, where I grew up, actually approach issues. And from there, after going to public school, this country elected an Indian American of Hindu faith, represent a district that arguably is producing more wealth, more innovation, more technology than any place in human history. That wouldn't happen in most other countries. You have to be a fifth-generation German to represent the core industry in Germany. You'd have to, I often joke, I said if I happened to be born in India, I don't think I'd ever have made it to the parliament, let alone be leading one of the great places in the world. It's an extraordinary country. And I start with that because I think that patriotism isn't just about putting flags up on a convention and saying, I'm a patriot. It's something actually that people, especially during a campaign, can sniff out, can figure out. Do you believe in the country? Do you believe in its promise? Do you believe in its hope? And I think a lot of the issues, the other issues that I'll get into, can fall away. Will give you the benefit of the doubt that you really do love and believe in the American project, and that you want to make the American project a success. So that's the first point, I think, of that the progressives need to orient with. The second thing of what is actually, in my view, the central challenge of this country, and then partly is by the term working class. I mean, that's an economic term of identification, right? I mean, we're identifying people as working class. We're not identifying them in some cultural way or identity way. We're identifying them as an economic way. And I believe that the progressive message fundamentally needs to begin with an economic message. That you have had wealth in this country concentrated in districts like mine. That you have had cities like Silicon Valley, Austin, Boston, New York succeed. And yet, over the last 40 and 50 years, you've seen factory towns hollowed out. You've seen manufacturing leave to China and Mexico. You've seen corporations chase low-wage labor. And no one really cared. Both parties said, oh, well, just go move. Go get another job. We've gone in income inequality from 53 in the world in the early 1980s to 128 today. And it's not just that people see what they built having disappeared. It's that we're not taking advantage of so much of the talent and potential in the country. And it transcends race. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin recently, and I met with two African Americans who were working in Master Lock. Neither of them voted, by the way, this election. They didn't vote Harris, they didn't vote Trump. And in 2022, their factory shuts down because of NAFTA. And they had $30 jobs, and they now have jobs that are $18 driving to deliver someone's prescription pills. Both of them were very active for Obama, but just didn't believe that we were going to do anything. But here is the statement that struck me. Chauncey says to me that his uncle in Milwaukee had a better life than he did, or that he thinks his kids will. Think about the import of an African American male saying that he thought his uncle back in the 1960s had a better life than his kids are going to have. The fundamental challenge that our country faces, whether you're talking about white working class towns that have been hollowed out, whether you're talking about Milwaukee and places in the African American community that have been hollowed out, is the disparity of economic security, the disparity of a secure economic life, a sense of not understanding that their kids are going to have a future and what future that's going to be in an economy where you have AI and technology. And the Democrats' central message should be that we are going to have a massive economic revitalization in these places, that while strategic tariffs may be one part of it, you're not going to be able to put up new factories, you're not going to be able to put up new economic industry, you're not going to be able to create new economic jobs and vitality just with tariffs, that we understand the modern economy better, that I come from a district which is producing the most wealth. You can't call me a socialist, call me a lot of other things. And we will bring government and the private sector and community leaders to turn the economy around for you. And we're going to actually have a tax policy that does that, not like the Trump tax cuts, which is 10% if you go to Mexico, but 21% if you stay in America. We're actually going to have a tax policy that says if you invest in America, then you get a lower corporate tax than if you go offshore. Currently, it's the opposite. We're actually going to have a policy of investment in these communities, not just a total deregulation and tax breaks where the wealth is going to continue to pile up in districts like mine. We're actually going to invest in a workforce development of 100,000 new carpenters and plumbers and electricians by taking the jobs program in the Department of Labor and expanding that and making sure that everyone has an opportunity for good paying jobs in these areas. And we're going to also give people basic technology training where they could get good paying jobs without having a 4-year degree, because actually AI and technology makes it that you don't have to know how to code. So we have an economic strategy that's going to ultimately make your life, your kids' life better in these communities than Trump did. Now, why did this not work with Biden? And then I'll get into the specific points with Ruy. Are we on the record? We're on the record. Look, I mean, President Biden had a lot of great qualities. Communication wasn't one of them. And the reality, someone once said to me, he's got great judgment. He's a great legislator. He's, extraordinary in terms of his humanity. You guys just beat up on him because he can't do well on the Sunday shows and isn't good on communicating the message. I said, that's like saying he's a great actor. You just can't give the lines. Like, communication is 90% of the modern job. And, so I think that he was unfortunately unable to connect sort of abstract industrial policy with, I'm turning around your lives in rural Ohio, and I'm taking you to the future, and you're going to understand that this is going to build wealth. And part of it is Trump is just a rich business guy who people assume knows what he's doing. And you're not going to convince people that the rich business guy doesn't know what he's doing. I often joke around. I said, people say, do people when you go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania or Warren, Ohio, think you're the Bernie Sanders coacher? I said, maybe, but usually they just think he's the Indian guy from Silicon Valley. He must know something about money. Must know something about technology. I think Democrats, sometimes we think politics is more detailed than it is. And what we have to do is convince people that we actually understand how to build wealth and to build wealth for their communities better and have a strategy. So I think Biden was unable, even though he had a lot of policies that were directionally correct, unable to convey that message and give a sense of vitality. The second thing is that not everything about economic opportunity for places that have been left out has to be about targeted to them. It also can be that this is what's going to make America strong. This is what's going to make America compete against China. Trump's messaging is not, okay, we're going to help the working class. It's, I'm going to give everything to the working class. That's what's going to build America. We have to have a vision, not this is going to do this for this place, that or that for some other place, but that our economic strategy is going to make us the manufacturing superpower of the world again. It's going to make us the leader in prosperity again. And that, Trump is now going to have 8 years, and he didn't do what he said he was going to do. And we actually have the strategy from Hamilton to Lincoln to FDR to actually do it, because that's what has worked in the past, which is to combine federal funding with federal workforce development, with the private sector, with local community leaders to have a national economic development strategy. That has to be the core of our message, and to say we want higher living wages for workers. We want workers in a digital world actually have some stock, some ownership. Currently 10% of workers, only 10% of Americans have 93% of the stock market. We want to make sure that there is protection for workers to organize and bargain. This isn't to say, okay, workers should just vote their economic interest, but it's to say that we're going to prioritize their economic interest. Now, you may disagree with me. I'll give you 2 anecdotes to Ruy's points. I was talking to folks in Ohio. One person that really struck me, who talked about 13 folks who had been suicidal or had depression because the plants had closed. And we were talking about what it meant in Ohio for these plants to shut down.
and what we could do to bring jobs back. And 80, about 2/3 in the conversation, he says, Khanna, I really like you. You're a moderate. And I said, sir, I don't want to mislead you. You're going to go in that room, you're going to Google, you're going to say Ro Khanna, progressive, Bernie Sanders coat trail. I said, no, I think you're a moderate. I said, why is that, sir? I believe in LGBTQ rights. I'm pro-choice. I believe in trans rights. He said, well, you've spent most of your time talking about my family, my jobs, my community, my kids, and what it's going to mean. And that's what I know that you're going to focus on. I believe the trans ads would not have worked nearly as well on Bernie Sanders as they did on Harris. I think part of the Democratic problem is that we do not have a clear sense of what we're going to focus on. And that focus needs to be the economic independence and economic security of every American. And we need to convince people that when we're given the chance again, morning, afternoon, and night, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to focus on. I joked around with John Podesta. I said, with due respect to Bill Goldstein, because I have respect for Bill Clinton, I said, the guy who hollowed out the entire Midwest, who sent all the factories away, left with 60% approval ratings. Your president's bringing it all back and you're stuck at 40%. Have you ever wondered why? It's because Clinton, morning, afternoon, night, said, I understand where the country's going. Here's how you're going to fit into it. And all I care about as president is making sure you're going to have an economic path. And Joe Biden was talking about Ukraine and Israel and everything else. But the American president, the American Democratic Party has to focus on the economy. Now, on the specifics of some of the points, I mean, I think, of course, we should be for border security. President Biden ran with a 15-point advantage on immigration in 2020. And a lot of where Obama was on immigration was pretty reasonable. He said, we have border security. If you come into the United States as an immigrant, you should learn English. You should learn about our country's history. You know, my parents spent a lot more time talking about my responsibilities than my rights. You won the lottery. You were born in America. Go learn about the country. Go make something of yourself. Go make good grades. And you know what? That's actually the story of most immigrant families. And yet we don't tell that story. Most immigrants, think about it. You're coming to America. You're taking all that risk. Your kids are born here or they grow up here. You probably really want them to love this country. You wouldn't have come all the way if it weren't for the case, if that weren't the case. So I think we have to talk about the rights of immigrants, but also the responsibility of immigrants and immigrant families, because that's true to the immigrant experience. And if you have been here undocumented and been here for many years and you're paying taxes and you're working hard, there should be a path to citizenship. You shouldn't get ahead of people who have done the process through the legal way, but there should be a path to citizenship as long as you are law-abiding and paying your taxes and working hard. We want those folks to be out of the shadows. Trump isn't going to deport 11 million people. So what is the opportunity? I think, why was Biden up 15 points and why did we have a reaction as we did as a party? Probably Trump was so extreme. He was separating families. The American people didn't like that. He was talking about building a border wall. He was calling Mexicans rapists. I think he's going to be extreme again. He's talking about repealing birthright citizenship. 60% don't agree that you should repeal birthright citizenship. So my view is that immigration is going to self-correct thanks to Donald Trump. And that we will be able to have basically where Obama was on immigration. And Obama was quite progressive on immigration, I mean, in many ways, but he said we have a border, a secure border, and we want to make sure that there's a path to citizenship for those undocumented. And I think he was where sort of 80% of Americans were. So I actually think it would be a much harder problem for the Democratic Party, though it would have been much better for the country if Harris had won. It would have been much harder for us politically. But Trump going to the extreme he is, and this is what we have to remember. Yes, sort of there have been some positions that the left have taken that maybe not in the mainstream. There are a lot of positions that Donald Trump has taken that aren't in the mainstream. And we've got to win after 4 years, 2 and 4 years of him. We're not running against a Mitt Romney Republican. I mean, we're running against a guy who thinks that the way to American greatness is to take Greenland and Panama. And it's not even the morality. It's just the stupidity of it. I mean, if he was born in the 19th century, he could be James Polk, but he's not. He's not. That's not how you build greatness in a modern society. And most people realize that. Most people aren't like, oh, we don't think that it's good to make Canada the 51st state because of the morality, though I think there are moral problems. They just think that's never going to happen. That's kind of a dumb way of looking at it. The same thing, by the way, about the extremism on climate and Trump's position. Remember, we're going to be running against people who don't believe in climate change. You know, it's not like we're running against a Mitt Romney Republican. So there's an extremism on their side. One of the biggest mistakes that Waltz made in the debate with Vance is he allowed him to be reasonable because he thought it attacked Trump. No, make Vance own all his unreasonable positions that he has taken. And it's not going to be hard. The most recent position, let's be like Andrew Jackson and tell the Supreme Court that we'll overturn it. That is a outside the mainstream position. Most people will think that that does more damage to American democracy than people on the left. It is abortion, no abortion, other even with rape or incest. And his put downs and DeSantis's put downs, unlike Trump, lack all humor. See, Trump at least has charm. When he says Newscum, then he gives Newscum a hug. It's like half people are in on the joke. Vance and DeSantis have just looked mean-spirited. There's no entertainment. And I think it's going to be a much easier contrast to paint them as far out in the mainstream and then for us to occupy the space. But of course, we have to be reasonable on climate. What we should say is solar is at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's cheaper right now than oil and gas and even nuclear. I'm for nuclear energy. I have great admiration for the people who were in the coal mine. I have great admiration for folks who helped build oil wells and supplied the energy of the 20th century and still of some of the 21st century. They helped make Silicon Valley possible. We ought to respect that. We ought to respect that contribution. But we ought to say that the way to the future is not what they're going to do, repealing the clean energy tax credits that are creating jobs in Tennessee and that are creating jobs in Alabama and that are going to help America lead the 21st century as opposed to China. That the way of the future, yes, it's all of the above. No one is saying shut down gas or shut down oil or coal today, but it's, are we going to be, here's the choice. Their view is to subsidize, tax subsidies for fossil fuels. Our view is, no, subsidize the new stuff, because America wants to lead in the clean energy future, because that's where the world is going. I think Americans will choose the future over the past, especially after 4 years of this. Again, we have to contrast not with the median centrist voter. We have to contrast with the extremism of Trump and Vance. One of the things, unfortunately, Trump and Vance understood is you have to win a majority of the majority to win in this country. You know, they had to win majority of Republicans, and then the Republicans won because maybe we were too extreme. We have to figure out how we can make sure the Democratic Party is positioned much less extreme than them. The final point on public safety. There I agree with you. I mean, California has been a disaster on some of those policies. I often go on Fox News and I say, Fremont is the 14th safest city. Sunnyvale is the 9th safest city in the country. San Jose is the 23rd safest city. And I'm not responsible for anything else. That's in my district. But we have you know, common sense policies. We've got, we like the police. We like the fire department. Of course, we believe that when police engage in actions that are that are unjust. They should be disciplined, and no one thinks that the police are perfect, and no one thinks that we don't have issues about issues of race, that if you're black in this country versus if you're white or Indian, that you're going to have a greater challenge with police. Of course, that's there. Most Americans, I think, understand that. But we believe that you should have more police. In fact, in San Jose, we increased the police because that actually helped with public safety. You've got a new generation in California, Matt Mahan in San Jose, Dan Lurie in San Francisco, Rod Salwan in Fremont, who are taking a more pragmatic approach on public safety and crime. I think that could do wonders if they're able to turn around those cities in the next year or two, especially San Francisco, because it's so affiliated with the Democratic brand. And if Lurie is able to show some progress on public safety, I think that will help our party tremendously. Let me end with this final point. I believe that what America is trying to do is an exceptionally hard, unprecedented enterprise. There has never been a cohesive multiracial democracy in the history of the world. The Canadians always hate when I say this, but they're like 86% white, as is Australia, as is Britain. We're 60% white, non-Hispanic. Post-65, we had a huge influx of legal immigration, like my parents, from parts of the world with different faiths, different cuisines, different traditions. It's really put to challenge this idea, can we be what Frederick Douglass called a composite nation, a nation with people from every part of the world. When we achieve that, it will be the singular civilizational achievement of any nation in the history of the world. I believe that. To think that we were going to have a linear line to that from Barack Obama was utterly naive. And I believe that what we are having is, Obama said there's a place in America for a skinny guy like, not that skinny anymore, but I used to be more, like Ro Khanna. Trump saying, what about the rest of us? We're going to play baseball in this country, not cricket. They can play cricket in Fremont. You know, that's partly the debate. It's a good debate to have. How are we going to emerge? Respecting tradition, respecting people who have built America, but having a place for the new. I believe after this 8 years of Trump, we're going to have the opportunity where people will hear a more aspirational, hopeful vision of what that country, a composite nation, looks like. And that's the conversation that progressives should lead.
Okay, thank you. Ruy, do you want to say anything in response to the congressman?
Well, I found his remarks very interesting. I mean, I like the economic program. You know, if it could be implemented at scale, you know, it's attractive. I mean, I think you may be underestimating the difficulties of actually getting there. I mean, it would be a big ask to have an approach as robust as that. And, you know, I really, I guess I disagreed about the problem the Biden administration had was that they didn't communicate well enough. I mean, if you look at the actual data about what happened in terms of manufacturing jobs and construction and so on under the Biden administration, there really wasn't that much progress. As Jason Furman just pointed out in his article in Foreign Affairs, you know, the change in manufacturing jobs grew basically at the same pace under Biden that they did among, you know, the last several administrations. So nothing's really changing. And manufacturing jobs are going to continue to be probably a pretty small share of American jobs, which leaves like 91% of the job structure you got to do something about. So, you know, like I said, I like the sound of it, the economic patriotism, the program of massive economic transformation. I'd certainly like to hear more about how this can actually be done. But I'm a little worried that it's not really going to be much, there's not a lot to build on from the Biden administration necessarily, despite the fact that a lot of money was spent. I guess the implication, I think, of what a lot of what you said about the cultural issues and about climate is, hey, yeah, some of this stuff went a bit too far, but you know, we can basically bring it back without changing much at all in terms of our basic commitments and our positions. It's just a matter of taking the edge off and talking more about economics. And I think that underestimates it in a broad sort of way. I think we're in a populist era, anti-institutional, anti-establishment era, and Democrats are the establishment. They are the institutions. They are the people who run the country, the elites that run the country as far as most people are concerned. And I think that is hard to get rid of unless you deal with some of these cultural issues in a much more aggressive, confrontational way that really will piss off a lot of people on the progressive left. It's not going to be enough just to say, you know, we're all Americans. America's a great country. You know, we'll work on this out in the future somehow. You actually have to change your positions on some of these key issues to make people feel like you're actually in their cultural wheelhouse. And it's not going to be enough just to talk more about the economy and try to kind of walk back things a little bit from the way they were before. So, you know, I'm a plausible case, but I guess I wasn't convinced.
Well, I think on some of the issues on public safety and immigration, it's more than just talking differently. I mean, it's saying we're for border security. It's saying we're for public safety. But I also think that the big difference I have is Donald Trump and Vance's positions are way outside the cultural mainstream. I don't think that they are in the center. If you had a Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Nikki Haley as the person, it's different. But you're putting all of the positions that we're taking. I mean, Trump is basically running a cultural identity war today, and a lot of what he's doing is way outside the mainstream. He's way outside the mainstream on abortion. He's way outside the mainstream on repealing birthright citizenship. He's way outside on the mainstream of denying climate change's existence. He's way outside of the mainstream on kind of this own the libs. And I think that gives us an opportunity. And so we have to win. We don't have to, you know, we have to figure out how we get our base and how we win. And all we have to do is show that we're less extreme in the cultural issues than Donald Trump. He's disqualified. And I think that's where we made a mistake in going after J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance should have been painted with, we tried with the cat ladies, but I think we can paint him out to be a totally out of touch, unlikable character with mainstream America. And and we should be ruthless about that, doing that in the way that Trump was.
Yeah, I would not underestimate J.D. Vance. That's just my view. I think he's a very smart politician. I think he's quite different than Trump. And if you think that it's going to be basically, you know, he's like a mini Trump and we can just make him completely crazy and
No,
insane.
Trump's a much more talented politician. He's not a mini Trump. He's not going to have the same resonance with black voters. I mean, he's not going to have the same resonance with Latino voters. And he's taken much more extreme positions than Trump on abortion. You know, Trump was savvy. He was moving to the center on a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I say, we'll see. I mean, J.D. Vance has plenty of time to change and tweak his positions before 2028, if in fact he is the candidate. And, you know, people remember when he was nominated, is basically people were jumping with glee about all the ways in which they would categorize J.D. Vance, the cat ladies and all that. And in the end, he talked so much to so many people in so many different ways that he actually came across as, this guy's a pretty smart guy. You know, he's interesting. I mean, he's not crazy. And I think this is a part of the problem with the Democrats. They think it's all a matter of talking enough about how crazy the other side is, how crazy Trump is, how crazy Vance is, how out of step they are. And then you wind up not dealing with the way your party itself.
We can do the same thing as Vance in that Vance was taking much more extreme positions and taking a pretense of reasonableness. Our positions are actually more aligned with the mainstream of the party or the country on many of these places than Vance. But we have to show how out of touch Vance is, denying climate change, no exceptions for abortion, rape, and incest, saying that Afghan refugees, if they come into the mall, may blow up the mall, saying that we are going to hire a racist guy back without having a weekend. I think that there was only one person who has survived the democratic ability to define in modern times. You know what that one person is? Donald Trump. That's why we like him. Look at Musk. Okay, Musk, he's shattered. You got people chanting, I don't agree with everything, but people chanting he's bringing apartheid to America. His numbers are 32%. Well, some of the Republicans like Donald Trump because he can withstand it. Well, Jody Vance and DeSantis won't be able to, and I believe whoever the Democratic nominee will have a decisive win in 2028. What we have to figure out is how we build a party that can bring this country together.
All right, we're
3
gonna-
weeks in, you're already predicting the 2028 election.
Yeah.
It's, pretty bold. We'll see how it all turns out for you.
Okay, we're going to open up to questions now, but please wait for the microphone. There's a lot of hands up, but.
Identify yourself.
Yeah, so just identify yourself and ask a question, don't speechify.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that I think that you can't say we're less extreme than them, so vote for us. I don't think that that's necessarily. But I do agree. Like I would say, 95% with each of you. I don't think that. But I will. My question is: we've seen a new progressive caucus chair with Greg Casar being elected. He seems to have talked about not focusing on identity politics or even the culture war issues that seem to have lost American people with progressives movement and focus more on economic issues, which you both kind of focus on. Do you think that Greg Casar could be like the future of like leading the progressives through this change of the how they are seen by the broader public?
Greg is terrific. I think he's focused on a lot of the economic issues. I think he's focused on a lot of, it comes off as very reasonable. And I think he's well respected. And, you know, I believe he will come off as reasonable. And my point is, if you look at the op-ed today, my 90% of it is that we need to have a positive vision for the country. But the reason he was pushing back with Ruy, whose work I really like, is a lot of times people look at the left's extremism and they don't look at the right's extremism. And the right's extremism is far more out of touch, in my view, with the country's mainstream than the left's extremism. You had an election where we had inflation, we had an 82-year-old president winning, where the 82-year-old president wasn't able to make people believe that he had done things that were great, and we still lost by 1.5%. So, you know, I just think that we shouldn't be in a position where we think that the party is so far out of the mainstream more than the other side.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Rishi. First of all, I'd just like to thank you for being an inspiration to Indian Americans on the progressive side, you and Congressman Jayapal. My question is, with increasing adversity, especially against Indians, you yourself were called out by J.D. Vance for being a so-called jerk, for defending a staffer who said normalize Indian hate. What is your words of advice or courage for minorities, Indian Americans, and how would you advise them to not fold under the pressure and hate that Republicans are invoking against people like us?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming here. His first book was right. We're going to win, especially by the time you grow up. So you have a lot to be confident about. It's a great country. The country is becoming, you know, think about this. Kamala Harris, an African American, Indian American woman, with a president with a 40-some% approval rating, and how do I say this diplomatically, who's not Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, ends up getting 48.5% in Pennsylvania and Michigan. You know, the country's come a long way. And the country is going to continue to become, we're making progress in spite of ourselves. I view this as sort of a last gasp of a cultural movement that's really afraid of the change of the country. And if we get the economics right, we're going to win. What I don't think is a right read on the politics is to just sort of have like a Bill Clinton Sister Souja moment. Partly, I think it'd be stupid politics, like Liz Cheney's politics, where whatever you think of her, really dumb. She basically, I mean, she may be a courageous person, but she totally doesn't understand the Republican base. And I think anyone who does that wouldn't understand where the Democratic Party is today. I think what is needed is a understanding of where the core democratic values are, and then explaining it in a reasonable, common sense, aspirational way, and showing how extreme the other side is to be able to win.
Well, I would just say in terms of this, you referred to my earlier book, The Emerging Democratic Majority, and sort of if you stick around, everything will be great. Here's the problem. If you look at the non-white vote in the United States, Democrats have been losing altitude for cycle after cycle. They get about half as much support among non-white voters as a whole as they used to. So if in fact we're becoming, I think basically a less racist country, even as we become more racially diverse, but not necessarily though becoming more democratic because of the ways the Democrats themselves has changed. I don't think it's the case that, there's sort of this last gasp reaction that's fueling this populist racist upsurge. In fact, it's a populist upsurge writ large. It's not racist, really. It's like people are sick of the elites and sick of the people who run the country. And that's why a lot of non-white voters are bailing out from the Democratic Party. You can't explain what's happened with Hispanic voters in this country on any other basis. They're not racist. That's not the reason they're voting for Donald Trump. He represents something they like about, and they don't like about the establishment, they like about how Trump is attacking it, and they're going to give him a try. And I worry a little bit in terms of what the congressman says. He's almost talking about, let's just have another extremism off, okay? You say the Democrats are too extreme. I say the Republicans and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and all they're too extreme. They're out of the mainstream. We may be out of the mainstream. They're more out of the mainstream. So it's an extremism off. I think that the solution to this is to move to the center. One party has to decisively occupy the center of American politics and convince voters that, in fact, they do occupy that center and it's very close to where you are. I think the idea the Democrats can continue to move forward or regain their lost ground, especially with working class voters, simply by taking advantage of the extremism of the other side is incorrect.
I'll just quote Bill Clinton, politics is like tennis. If you think you're about winning the set, you'll lose the point at hand. One of the things that Donald Trump understood, he had to win the primary before he won the general election. And there's so many politicians who think about how you win the general election. First, you got to win a primary.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. We've seen kind of this increase in polarization. Each side is calling the other one, each party is calling the other party extreme and crazy. And it leads to government shutdowns, nothing gets done. The incumbent party usually loses because there's so much frustration that nothing has gotten done. What path do you see for bipartisanship? What path do you see to actually getting things done where each party can work together to actually achieve that legislation that gives Americans a better economy?
I think a lot. I mean, the Biden infrastructure bill was bipartisan. The CHIPS Act, which we did with Todd Young, and it was bipartisan to get semiconductor chips in this country. I've worked with Marco Rubio on creating a National Economic Development Council. So and I had even said I would work with Elon Musk on Doge until he decided that he didn't believe in upholding the Constitution. So I think that there is tremendous opportunity in the next generation in 2028, 2032 for bipartisanship to emerge. But it has to be one which is constitutional. It has to be one that respects basic norms in our society. And I was hopeful. I was willing to give actually the administration a chance on some bipartisan initiatives. But the way they've gone about Doge, I got criticized from my own party to say I would work with them initially. But the way they've gone about it is blatantly unconstitutional from my perspective.
Okay, take this one.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Teixeira. So you had previously, before we moved to discussion, said that the issue with the Democratic Party is that there is a lot of conversation in sort of painting the right as these sort of crazy extremists. However, with rhetoric from, say, the Trump administration, such as Border Czar, Sleepy Joe, or Crooked Hillary, why do you think that it's only an exclusive issue from the left as opposed to a more bipartisan problem?
Oh, I do think it's a bipartisan problem. I do. I just, to the extent I disagree with the congressman, he sees it extremely heavily weighted toward one side. I think it's more something that both sides have to deal with. Both sides are viewed in many ways as being extreme by the center of the country. Neither party has done a particularly good job of convincing the center of the American electorate that they are, in fact, not extreme moderate party. This is a problem. So look, I mean, Trump does and says lots of extreme things, so keep in mind people take him seriously, not literally necessarily. Look, you know, whatever extreme thing he says today may say something completely different tomorrow, and people are, in a sense, almost used to that. So, but again, I think there's a sort of touching faith that I think a lot of Democrats have that finally Trump is going to do or say something so extreme that this time is different. This time it'll be completely discredited. This time we'll waltz back into power, and we won't have to do anything particularly different than what we're already doing. And I think that's a mistake. I think that the Republicans have their demons they're trying to wrestle with. The Democrats have their demons they're trying to wrestle with. And the result, as I wrote with my colleague Yuval Levin at AEI, is politics without winners, where we do have toggle back and forth between the parties. We do have no party that can really establish a period of significant productive electoral dominance. And, we may see the same thing. And the Democrats may come back in 2020. I don't know. I mean, I'm not as confident as a congressman in that, but you never know, right? So, but what a party should be seeking to do is become the dominant majority party in American politics. And to do that is not easy. And it does mean taking on the extremists in your own party and carving out a path to the center.
I agree with a lot of that. I think Donald Trump is one of the most phenomenal political candidates in modern times. I don't agree with his leadership, but I've never underestimated Donald Trump's talent. I mean, he's entertaining, he's humorous, he's capable of commanding attention. I just think that 13 years on the political stage is a long time. It's about FDR's length. And the last 10 elections, we've gone back and forth. Now, the question of how we're going to bring this country together, I think Joe Biden had no shot to do it, because anyone who defeated Donald Trump was never going to be able to bring the country together. I mean, Barack Obama, anyone. You defeated Donald Trump, you're not going to be able to bring the country together. But I think that there is an opportunity after he's gone, and I think the way to do it is for some people, some folks, and there are a number of people, 5, 10 people like this, who can navigate enough through the Democratic landmines in a primary to emphasize and lead on the economy, and to focus on those places in the economy that bring us together as a nation. And that is my view of how you start to do it, because we're so divided on a lot of these cultural issues.
Okay, next question.
Thank you both for being here. BBC has came out about how a growing number of youth in the United States have anxiety about climate change. We've read the articles about how countries like Micronesia run the risk of being submerged by rising sea levels. Stories about farmers who their crops have been killed because of weird rain patterns caused by climate change. As you said earlier, and I agree with you that it will take a lot longer to get off fossil fuels, but you're saying it's the 11th issue, while some paint it as the first issue. For a long time now, climate change has been painted as an immediate danger. Is that no longer the stance of the Democratic Party? Or
Well, look, a lot of I sympathize with his point about the voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan, et cetera. They can't make ends meet. They see their jobs leaving. They think, okay, why is someone focused right now just on climate? But Joe Biden goes through the Democratic Party, almost loses to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, sees young people passionate about climate and their future. It's not like he's not in touch. You've got a, it's a Rubik's Cube. You've got to be able to win the climate and the general election. You got to be able to mobilize your base and swing voters. And both Trump and Biden are trying to do this. And so, I don't think Joe Biden thinks that we need to sort of end fossil fuels. He's trying to navigate how you can speak to voters like you and in an authentic way, and also speak to the person who's doing fracking in Pennsylvania. And the challenge is it's a very difficult issue because there's- I think I was right about the research that for most voters, it doesn't come in the top 10 when you look at the swing voters in some of these states. But maybe it increasingly is an issue, but for young voters and for many people, it's an enormous issue. And so how we talk about that is a challenge, but it's an equal challenge for their side because their side has climate denialism.
Got a question online.
Yeah, this question is from Harrison Cantor. They write, how do progressives successfully navigate the media and the focus from both sides of the aisle on culture war issues to bring up those pragmatic solutions to economic conditions? How do we keep these solutions at the top of the mind for voters instead of the focus on the culture war stuff?
I want
Roy to have a word. I don't want to take more time. Either we have to be willing to go into spaces that are uncomfortable and have those conversations. Where I do agree with Roy is we should not police language. We shouldn't cancel people. We should respect people who have different viewpoints. We need to respect people who have different viewpoints on difficult issues or social issues, and not back away from our view, but to have conversations. One of the biggest mistakes I think that Harris made, other than not leading convincingly on the economy, it's not about the platforms. If Bernie Sanders were president, everyone knows that he would spend 4 years trying to get Medicare for all. You may not agree with it. That's what he would do. If Elizabeth Warren was president, everyone knows she would spend 4 years trying to take on Wall Street's finance. Donald Trump, everyone knows he's going to try these tariffs and he's going to help with the border. With Kamala Harris, it was unclear. What was she going to do? And that's why I think some of the trans ads and all those work, because she didn't have a clear sense that, okay, really the economy was going to be the focus. So I think we have to, people can sense it. What is our focus? What are we going to be doing? And then to treat people with respect with those cultural differences.
Well, I think that ultimately you have to move to the center on these cultural issues. That's really the way to diffuse the culture wars. I mean, if you don't want them to keep on coming up and coming up and coming up, then you have to actually like capture the issue or neutralize it by moving to the center on that particular issue and convincing people that in fact is where you and your party are. And then that helps damp down the issue. I think the concept the congressman has, and I think a lot of people have, and I guess it's not completely crazy. It's just if we talk more about economic issues and sort of give people our economic vision, that will, and we're sort of strong enough about that, then the culture war issues won't come up anymore. I don't think that's true. I think people feel strongly about these issues. I think there are people on the right who feel strongly, people on the left who feel strongly, and it's going to be very difficult to take them off the table until someone moves. Someone's got to blink on these issues. And I don't think, well, take the trans issue, for example. This is a real hot button thing. Look, the idea of biological boys and men and women's and girls sports is an 80-20 issue against the Democrats, 80-20. Democrats are not budging on this issue. Look, the most effective ad in the last election was Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you. I mean, how much clearer do you want as a signal of a cultural issue that is not helping the Democrats and makes them appear out of touch? So one way to diffuse that issue is say, yeah, okay, maybe we shouldn't have biological boys and men and women's and girls sports. That's not what we're about. Let's move on to something that's really important. But I think this is a problem. I think for big chunks of the Democratic Party, they don't want to compromise on that kind of an issue because they see it as somehow like, the civil rights issue of our time or whatever. And I think that's just not true. But enough people believe it that it's important. So, I mean, I realize this is uncomfortable for some people, but somebody's got to compromise on an issue like that where the Democrats are on the short end of the stick and isn't going to be the people who are on the long end of the stick.
On that issue, I mean, we just had a vote in Congress. I mean, many people voted against a federal ban on that and said, look, let the school districts decide, let the states decide, let athletic associations decide. You don't need the federal government making determinations, and it's different for different sports. And people, sometimes school districts may want it in terms of a sense of belonging, but I don't think that's why Harris lost the election. I think she was, in even those ads, it was about her priorities. And there are a lot of issues where Republicans have taken 30, 70 positions. It's more about, there was inflation and the border. That's, I think, why she lost. And the border, I agree with you, the 8 million people who were let in, that was a real issue. I think on the cultural issues, if we come up with reasonable and authentic, I think if we start flip-flopping, that shows a lack of authenticity. One of the things Trump doesn't do, and it does it when it's to some extent on abortion, but he largely is who he is. And I think if a Democrat came in and said, well, we were for trans rights, and now we looked at the polls and it's a 30-70 issue, and now we're not, it comes off as phony. I think it was one of the biggest critiques of Kamala Harris. No one would have cared. Fracking is different. No one would have cared whether Kamala Harris was for Medicare for all or not in that election. That was not the issue. But her flipping on those things made her seem like she wasn't sincere. She wasn't true to her ideals. And I think that being authentic in who you are is more important. And Trump, we haven't been able to paint as extreme, but God forbid one of these people who was pardoned, who hit a cop, goes out and commits a gruesome crime. I mean, that's like a Willie Horton ad being waiting to be written on the Republican nominee. The extreme, we are forgetting how extreme and out of touch this administration is on a number of these issues.
Next question, my colleague, Professor Tom Merrill.
First, I just want to say thank you. It's really great to have a spirited conversation on campus. So I want to thank you both for that. And I'm speaking here not as a conservative or as a progressive, but as a member of what you might call the Nathan Tarkoff party. So Congressman, just for you, I want to say that. So my question is for you, Congressman, which is, you talked about economic populism. You talked about a new way of thinking about the economy. A lot of the themes that I hear from you sound awfully familiar from folks I hear on the other side of the aisle. And in particular, when I hear things about manufacturing, about the middle of the country, you sound a little bit, and this might not be popular, like J.D. Vance, right, on some of those economic things. And I know that there's a rethinking about economics on the right and on the left, that neoliberalism is sort of a swear word, libertarianism is sort of a swear word on the right in parallel ways. I'm wondering if you can talk about the economic ideas about what is a genuine economic. It's one thing to say we want to focus on the economy, but what are you going to do differently, or what should someone do differently? What could the country do differently that's gonna make an actual change? That's not so clear to me. So I wonder if you can talk about that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I think that this is where I give Trump credit. I don't think anyone in Silicon Valley was flying to Youngstown, Ohio until Trump won in 2016. And I think it was a fundamental expression of people saying this economy, these communities that were devastated haven't had their say in American life, and that you got to pay attention. And I think Trump's central insight, while we were running on joy and everything is great, is basically coming to and telling people, you've gotten shafted. It's not great. And he came off as honest. I mean, one of his finest moments was when Ted Cruz said, hey, you gave Hillary Clinton money. And he said, yeah, let me tell you how this works. Rich people give everyone money. And people said, yeah, okay, this guy is honest. Where I think he lacks, and where I think Vance, I mean, we'll see. I mean, Vance is a smart guy. I'm not saying Vance wouldn't know policy-wise the solutions, but what Vance isn't going to be pushing is what is it going to take to get new factories, new jobs? Ru's right. It's not an easy project. I mean, and it can't just be factories and manufacturing. I think it also has to be technology, and it also has to be diverse industry. And my view is we have to target places like Johnstown, Farrow, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, and show 7, 8 places where we're revitalizing it. I had a bill with Marco Rubio to create a National Economic Development Council, have federal financing, bring in companies, try to revitalize these places so that they're bringing in wealth into these communities and show that you can do that. Biden was unable to, so abstract. And I said to the president, I said, put up a steel plant. You know, Summers crunches the numbers. There are only 83,000 steel jobs, blah, 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 blah. I said, it's not about that. Donald Trump said, you can't be a country of steel. You're the president bringing back steel. We as Democrats, the biggest thing we have lost that Trump gets is you can dismiss it as marketing. I call it the symbolism of politics. It's speaking to people's hopes, aspirations, beliefs. We said, you know, you have Biden's numbers didn't go up. They went up more than Trump's, but Trump has convinced people that he gets them and he wants to build for them. And we have not emotionally connected with people. We've got to first emotionally connect, in my view.
What I'd like to do now is give Bill Galston a question and then maybe take the microphone and ask a few students to ask questions together, and then you guys answer as you.
Actually, Alan, I've decided that I'll have lots of chances, and the students in the room,
Okay.
this is their shot. So
All right. Oh, we need to.
We can go a little bit longer, right?
Okay. Well,
Your team said 7,
What-
sir.
what do I
You're in
get?
charge, so.
All right, let's go 10 more minutes. We have something important.
so just get several questions.
And why don't you answer the first couple? I don't want to take up all the.
Quickly.
Hello, my name is Aisel. Thank you for both for coming. So I just wanted, we talked a lot about the Democratic Party moving towards the center, but I kind of just not quite following how that like works with a party that whenever they get into power, they utilize the executive branch and utilize now Doge to push the constitutionality and the legality of their actions. So I guess when you're saying move towards the center, like where do we draw the line? Like the congressman said, like at a certain point, it seems disingenuous. So like where do you draw that line when you're facing a party that is constantly further and further to the right?
Thank you. Get a couple more.
What did that grow? Great.
Yeah, following on from that sort of, I was going to ask about how extremism has been proven to get votes with like further extremism within political parties around, well, I mean, the world at the moment. So with the rise of independent candidates and extremism within parties, what extent do you think multi-party systems and a division of parties that are currently existent would help the current situation?
Maybe one more.
Thank you. You said that both of you suggested that we turn away from social issues, whether that's just talk more about the economy or move more to the center. However, some of the strongest proponents of those social issues, whether it's LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights like the ERA, or other issues, are our strongest field organizers. Many of them, I would assume, feel some betrayal with the Democrats' insistence on moving more to the center or ignoring those issues. How do you suppose we keep such strong activists and field organizers in the party when you're continually telling them that your issues aren't as important as these other ones that we're focusing on?
Okay, you wanna?
Okay. Well, first question, I guess, was about, how do you deal with Republican extremism when they're getting so extreme, and how can you move to the center given all the stuff that they're doing? Well, I mean, I think it's not that complicated. You look at the stuff that they're doing, and you look at, the stuff that seems reasonable and you agree with that. You look at the stuff that's unreasonable and you don't agree with that. I mean, a number of Trump's executive orders, I think on trans stuff, on this basically permitting and regulatory reform and weakening NEPA so we can build stuff more easily in this country. There's a number of things that he's promulgated that actually are not bad ideas. The stuff about DEI is not very popular, and in its current incarnation, it's sort of metastasized into this annoying presence in so many different institutions. I mean, what we should be for, what Democrats should be for, is equal opportunity, merit-based society, right? And so you want to do something that reinforces that. I mean, if diversity means anything, it just means reaching out to people as far as you can to make sure they have the opportunity to get ahead and to acquire merit. It's not reducing the standards by which people are judged. And this is basically some of the stuff that Trump said. So I think, well, that's reasonable. I think Democrats should agree with it. The stuff that's unreasonable, then you got to basically say, no, we're not going to do that. That's a bad idea. But it's not rocket science. I mean, if you have an opportunity to move to the center based on what your opposition party has done, you should take it and say, okay, well, this is what the law of the land at this current time, and we can live with that. So I don't think it's that complicated, but I think Democrats' first impulse is always just to resist, resist, resist. And I think this is going to be a mistake in the context of the Trump administration, because there's going to be so many opportunities to resist, resist, resist. And if you're resisting all the time, people get tired of it, and you don't accomplish much. You don't concentrate your forces and spend your political capital wisely. Even some of these Doge-related things. I mean, people don't like bureaucracies. They actually think a bunch of what the government does is not wise and is not spent well. And there probably are things being done that aren't worthwhile. But the first impulse of Democrats is to defend the institution, full stop. It wasn't so long ago Democrats were for reinventing government. I mean, he's not doing it the right way. Okay, but maybe you should tell people you're for doing it the correct way. That it isn't a matter of stopping everything and letting everybody else. But we agree that our institutions are not working the way they should. The more you defend institutions, full stop, the more people think you're just the institutional and establishment party. So I think that's a possible approach. In terms of the multi-party system, I mean, well, I think it's the case that if you had a multi-party system, some of the more extreme elements of, say, the Democratic Party or the Republican, they would be in smaller, parties, right? And maybe that would be a good thing, maybe it'd be a bad thing, but you could, I mean, I think AOC once said, I shouldn't be in the same party with like Joe Biden, people like that. I should be in my AOC left populist Green Party. Okay, if you had a if you had a proportional representation system, you might indeed have that. Would that make our politics better? I don't know about that. You look at a lot of the other PR systems in Europe and how they're doing, and you think, well, yeah, I can see it has some advantages. People could, vote for the party that really is very close to what they think, as opposed to these omnibus parties we have. But it doesn't necessarily make for the most stable and productive governance. Final point about the activists. I mean, I think we shouldn't confuse the kind of people who vote for the Democratic Party in any given demographic group, either Black, young, Hispanic, women, whatever, with the activists who say they represent them. They do not, in fact, represent them. They, in fact, have views that are typically very significantly to the left and much more militant than the people who actually wind up voting for the Democratic Party in large enough numbers to matter. And I think the idea that the Democrats don't stick to their guns in each and every progressive activist position, progressive activists will bail out of the Democratic Party will be a shell is just ridiculous. I think there's going to be plenty of Democrats and plenty of people that knock on doors, and maybe they'll actually have a better product to sell. So I'm not too worried about it.
Give the congressman the last remarks.
First, I've enjoyed the spirited conversation with Roy, even where we've disagreed. I hope you all know that I have a lot of respect for him and should listen to his viewpoints, and partly it makes you stronger to hear people who you disagree. So appreciate the conversation, and thank you, Ellen, for moderating it. Let me start with the activist point. You know who doesn't betray his activists? Donald Trump. The first rule of politics is you've got to be able to be honest to build your base. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't call them out if there's something you disagree with, but I have been very, very committed to standing up for LGBTQ rights. I did a speech saying that we can't throw overboard the transgender community or the immigrant community or communities that feel threatened. And I don't think that that's going to ultimately cost the Democratic Party. I think Donald Trump, remember, Trump was at 40-some% approval when Joe Biden won. And Joe Biden, again, love him, but he wasn't exactly Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, and he beat him. So this is my full expectation is that Donald Trump unhinged, unfortunately, meaning not checked by Mattis, not checked by Kelly, not checked by impeachments in the way, the country's going to be ready for a change. I firmly believe that. Whether that's good for, change is going to capture the American Senate is an open question. But I think that we can have a positive vision articulate where our vision is. I did in the op-ed today on where I think wasteful cuts are. I tried with those and have a clear view that we need to defeat Donald Trump and define J.D. Vance like they defined Kamala Harris and have the toughness for American politics to do that and not lose sight that our goal is to win in 2026 and 2028 and be Pollyannish about it. Because we're Pollyannish about it, we will win. We win in American politics. You know, I mean, LBJ said Humphreys and I will both cut someone's looking off. The difference is I would enjoy it, whereas Humphrey would scream. And, you have to have a toughness in the fight. And you're not going to win. And voters can sense that. Well, voters want someone tough and not someone who's going to abandon ideals. The point about multi-candidate parties is a great idea in theory, maybe at the congressional level, certainly at the level of Senate, but I think at the presidential level, very, very hard to pull off. The final point, what was the final question? Do you remember? It's
About Republican, how can we compromise? with
compromise. Yeah,
Republicans?
look, I think we should take the best ideas from prevalence, but we need to present it as a democratic vision. But right now, it's not just a matter, it's a matter of substance. I mean, what they're doing is fundamentally unconstitutional. To be willing to fight on that.
Please join me in thanking Ruy Teixeira.